What if the quietest man in the entire story of Jesus was the one who held the whole plan of salvation together, and almost no one noticed? Think about that for a second. We live in a world where the loudest voices seem to shape the story, where heroes win wars with speeches or swords, and where history books are packed with names that never let you forget them. But what if the most crucial part of the greatest story ever told wasn't a prophet, a priest, or a king, but a simple, silent carpenter? Imagine if the fate of the Messiah, the hope of every nation, actually depended on a man whose greatest act was not saying a word. Does that sound unbelievable? It might, but stick around, because what you're about to discover about Joseph of Nazareth could flip everything you thought you knew about Christmas, about Jesus, and maybe even about how God works in your own life. Let's pause here. When's the last time you really thought about Joseph, Mary's husband, the carpenter, the one almost always standing just off to the side in every nativity scene? Most of us grew up with a vague picture, Joseph as a supporting character, maybe even a little bit of an afterthought. But what if Scripture is actually inviting us to take a second look? What if, hidden in the quiet spaces between the verses, there's a story that could reshape how we understand faith, obedience, and what it means to trust God when nobody's clapping for you? If you're ready to go deep, drop a 888 in the comments, hit like, and make sure you're subscribed, because we're about to open up a mystery that's been hiding in plain sight for thousands of years. Now, close your eyes for a second and imagine the dusty streets of first-century Nazareth. The air is thick with the scent of freshly cut wood and baking bread. The world is restless. Rome rules with iron and suspicion, and the religious elite police every word and custom. In the middle of this, there's a small, dimly lit workshop. You hear the rhythmic scrape of a blade on cedar, the muted thud of a mallet, the gentle hum of a man lost in his work. His name is Joseph, and almost nobody in the village pays much attention. His hands are rough, calloused from years of honest labor, and his clothes are simple: a faded linen tunic, an apron stained with the dust and oil of a dozen projects. To outsiders, he's just another craftsman. But there's something about the way he moves, the steadiness of his gaze, the quiet way he holds himself. It's as if he's carrying a secret only heaven knows. It's easy to forget that Joseph was a descendant of kings. The Gospel of Matthew reminds us he was of the house and lineage of David. But those royal days are long gone. The throne is just a memory. And Joseph's crown is the sweat that beads on his brow as he bends over his workbench. And yet, in the mysterious wisdom of God, this is the man chosen to protect the most important child ever born, not because of his title, not because of his influence, but because of his character. One evening, as Joseph straightens up the shop, he glances at the setting sun and hears distant laughter from the neighbors' children. Nazareth is a small village, the kind of place where everyone knows your business before you do. He sets down his tools, wipes his hands, and prepares for the evening meal. Life is ordinary, until one day, a single sentence from Mary will turn his world upside down. Mary, she's young, barely a woman, but there's a light in her eyes, a calmness, an inner strength that seems to belong to another age. Joseph knows her family, knows her reputation, and though their engagement was arranged, there's a quiet contentment in the prospect of building a life together. The betrothal is official in the eyes of their community. They already belong to one another. Joseph dreams of a simple home, maybe a few children, and a life of peace, a future that honors the old promises made to David, even if it looks nothing like royalty. But then, the whisper comes. Mary is pregnant, and not by Joseph, in the world Joseph inhabits. This is more than a scandal. It's a catastrophe, betrayal, shame, The law is harsh, and the consequences for an unfaithful betrothed are not just social. They're potentially fatal. Joseph's mind spins. He knows Mary, or at least he thought he did. Was it really possible that she had betrayed him? The pain of confusion, humiliation, and disbelief crashes over him like a storm. But even as he wrestles with his own heartbreak, something remarkable happens. Joseph doesn't explode with anger. He doesn't rush to judgment. Instead, he makes a decision that will echo through eternity. He chooses mercy. He decides to put her away quietly, to end the engagement without spectacle, without vengeance. Better for him to fade into the background, to shoulder the shame, than to expose Mary to the public scorn, and far worse that could come. In a culture that values honor above almost anything, this is not weakness. It's the strength of a man who'd rather lose his reputation than destroy another's life. It's the kind of decision that nobody notices, but God sees it all. That night, Joseph lies awake, staring at the flickering shadows on his ceiling. His mind churns with questions that have no answers. Why would God allow this? Why would Mary, of all people, do this to him? Or could she be telling the truth? Is it possible that God is at work in a way that defies everything Joseph understands about the world? The silence of the night is thick, and Joseph is prepared to accept heartbreak as just another part of the story. The cost of living in a world where hope so often seems to vanish. And then, the extraordinary happens, not in a blaze of glory, not in a temple or a palace, but in a dream. An angel appears not with thunder or lightning, but with a voice that seems to fill the very marrow of his bones. Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. No explanation, no debate, just a command and a promise. Joseph wakes before dawn. The world hasn't changed, but he has. The shame, the confusion, the weight of what everyone else will think, it's all still there. But so is the voice. So is the call to trust when it makes no sense, to obey when the road is dark and lonely, and as the first light slips through the cracks of his little workshop. Joseph makes the most important decision of his life. He says yes, not in words, but in action. He goes to Mary. He doesn't demand explanations. He simply takes her hand. I know, his eyes say, and I'm here. And with that silent act, the history of the world changes forever. Joseph's life, once so predictable, now takes on a quiet gravity he never imagined. He's not just a carpenter anymore. He is now the chosen guardian of a mystery, too great for words. A story unfolding in whispers and in the quiet choices of everyday faithfulness. As days pass in Nazareth, the rumors start. Whispers curl like smoke through the streets, drifting from neighbor to neighbor, sticking to the walls of homes and the edges of conversations. Joseph can feel eyes on his back when he goes to market, hears the murmurs when he passes the synagogue. He's a man marked not by crime, but by confusion, by suspicion, by the audacity of mercy, in a world that prizes appearance over grace. But Joseph stands firm. He's never been one for drama, never cared much for gossip. His strength isn't the kind that shouts or demands. It's the kind that endures, that quietly persists day after day, building something beautiful out of whatever life hands him. He returns to his workshop, shaping wood with steady hands, letting the rhythmic work calm his racing thoughts. Every plank he smooths, every stool he crafts, becomes a silent prayer, an offering to the God whose ways he can't understand, but chooses to trust anyway. Mary, too, is changed by all that's happening. She moves through the village with her head high, her eyes bright with a secret hope and a sorrow that few could bear. She doesn't flinch from the stares, doesn't answer the pointed questions. Joseph watches her, marvels at her quiet courage. Sometimes, in the soft hush of twilight, they sit together, neither speaking, both simply sharing the peace that settles when two souls decide to walk into the unknown together. There's an unspoken understanding between them. Whatever the world says, whatever shame might come, they will carry it side by side. Time passes, and Mary's condition becomes impossible to hide. The pregnancy grows, as does the tension in the village. Customers come less often. Some won't look Joseph in the eye. A few even turn away payment, an unspoken judgment on the man they once called righteous. Yet Joseph carries on. He keeps working, keeps loving, keeps choosing mercy over bitterness. Sometimes, as he shapes a piece of olive wood in the evening light, he thinks about the old promises given to David, the songs of hope his father once sang. Could it really be that those promises are coming to life right here, in his own humble home? Then comes the news that will set everything in motion again, a decree from Caesar Augustus, requiring everyone to return to their ancestral town to be counted and taxed. For Joseph, that means a journey to Bethlehem, the city of his forefather David. The timing could not be worse. Mary is heavily pregnant, the roads are dangerous, and the prospect of travel fills Joseph with dread. But there is no choice. Law is law, and the wheels of empire do not stop for anyone, not even for the mother of the Messiah. So Joseph prepares. He gathers what little they can carry: a worn blanket, a pouch of dried fruit, a flask of water. He finds a donkey, does his best to make the journey bearable for Mary. On the morning they leave, the sun hangs low over Nazareth. Neighbors glance up from their chores, pretending not to notice, but Joseph feels the weight of their silence. He helps Mary onto the donkey, steadies her with a gentle hand, and together they set out on the long road south. The journey is slow, every mile a test of patience and faith. The hills are steep, the days hot and dusty, and at night the chill creeps in, biting through even the thickest cloak. Joseph walks beside the donkey, keeping a watchful eye on Mary. Sometimes they speak softly about old stories of Abraham wandering in faith, of Moses braving the wilderness. Sometimes they simply walk in silence, letting the rhythm of their steps become their prayer. On the second day, a storm rolls in. Wind howls across the open country, whipping dust into their faces. Joseph pulls the blanket tighter around Mary's shoulders, shields her with his own body. At one point, Mary stumbles as she tries to dismount, and Joseph's heart lurches. He catches her, steady and sure. She gives him a tired, grateful smile. "I'm okay," she whispers. He nods, but the worry never leaves his eyes. Every challenge they face, every moment of hardship, Joseph shoulders it all, never complaining, always present. At night, they huddle beneath a lone fig tree, sharing a simple meal in the dim light. Joseph tries to hide his own hunger, making sure Mary eats first. He thinks about the angel's words, about the promise entrusted to them in the quiet. He wonders if he's up to the task, but then Mary squeezes his hand, and for a moment, all the doubts and fears melt away, replaced by a peace he can't explain. Finally, after days of travel, the walls of Bethlehem come into view, painted gold by the setting sun. Relief floods Joseph. But the town is bursting with travelers, relatives from distant lands, families camped in every corner, every inn overflowing. Joseph knocks on door after door, only to be met with shaking heads, curt refusals, or apologies that feel more like rejection. He tries not to let the frustration show, but each closed door presses down on him like a weight. Mary's labor pains start as the last sliver of daylight fades. Panic threatens to rise, but Joseph forces himself to stay calm. Finally, a kind woman takes pity, pointing them to a rough stable carved into the hillside. It's not much, just straw, stone, the lingering smell of animals, but it's shelter. Joseph makes it as clean and comfortable as he can, spreading their blanket, gathering straw, offering Mary whatever comfort he can manage. And then, in the middle of the night, beneath the watchful stars, a cry pierces the darkness. Mary's son is born helpless, tiny, wrapped in the rags of a world that doesn't understand what's happening. Joseph's hands, so used to shaping wood and building houses, now cradle the hope of the world. He cleans the newborn as best he can, tears pricking his eyes. Mary smiles through her exhaustion, and in that moment, nothing else matters. Not the journey, not the rumors, not the weight of what others think. For Joseph, this is the miracle, not thunder or fire from heaven, but the simple, sacred wonder of life beginning in the most unlikely place. He holds the child close, feeling the heartbeat. The warmth, the promise that somehow, against all odds, God is at work in the middle of their mess. As dawn breaks over Bethlehem, Joseph looks at Mary, then at the baby, and he knows this is his family. This is his purpose, and whatever comes next, he will face it not with grand speeches, but with the quiet, relentless love that only the righteous truly understand. The world outside Bethlehem has no idea what has just happened in that humble cave. Rome slumbers. The priests and scribes snore behind locked doors. Merchants rest from their travel. But inside this rough shelter, eternity is holding its breath. Joseph sits by Mary's side, the newborn bundled in scraps of cloth, sleeping soundly in a makeshift manger. Joseph listens to the quiet, the soft breathing of Mary, the faint rustle of straw, and for a while, he lets himself believe that maybe, just maybe, everything will be okay. But soon, the outside world finds them. Before sunrise, there's a commotion at the entrance to the stable. Low voices, the shuffle of feet on hard earth. Joseph rises, instantly alert. It's a group of shepherds, wild-eyed, wind-burned, still smelling of the fields. Joseph steps protectively between them and his family, but their faces are alight with awe, not malice. They're almost trembling as they tell their story. A vision of angels in the night sky, a message of peace and glory, the command to find a child wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger. Joseph doesn't have words. He simply gestures toward Mary and the baby. The shepherds kneel, overcome, tears running down their faces as they whisper blessings and praise. For the first time, Joseph sees with his own eyes that this story is bigger than anything he could have imagined. He doesn't fully understand, but he feels a surge of gratitude that anyone else, knows. This child's birth is not just another page in the world's endless story. The shepherds depart as dawn breaks, their voices echoing praise into the empty streets. In the days that follow, Joseph does his best to keep his new family safe. The town is still crowded, resources are thin, and Joseph spends his hours foraging for food, negotiating for supplies, and making sure Mary and the child have what they need. Sometimes, he stares at the baby while he sleeps, marveling at the fragility, the absolute dependence of this little one, God's promise, now wrapped in helpless flesh. He wonders what kind of future awaits them, how he can possibly live up to the responsibility of being this child's earthly father. Then, word spreads that strange visitors are making their way through Bethlehem, wise men from far-off lands. Their robes fine, their camels heavy with gifts. Joseph is wary at first, uncertain of their motives, but when they arrive, it's clear they come in reverence. They bow before the baby, opening boxes of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Each gift, Joseph realizes, carries a deeper meaning: royalty, divinity, and even suffering. It's as if the whole universe is hinting at the greatness and the sorrow that lies ahead for this child. The wise men leave as quietly as they came, their presence lingering in the stable like incense. Mary holds the baby tighter, her eyes distant, perhaps seeing more than she can say. Joseph sits beside her, silent but steadfast, determined to be the protector, the provider, the anchor in this wild, uncertain journey. Just as Joseph allows himself a moment to breathe, a new terror arrives this time, not as rumor or prophecy, but as a clear and present danger. Joseph wakes in the night, heart pounding, a dream so vivid he can't shake it. An angel's voice, unmistakable. Get up, take the child and his mother, flee to Egypt. Herod is searching for the child to destroy him. Fear courses through Joseph's veins, not for himself, but for his family. He doesn't hesitate. There's no time to question, no room for doubt. He shakes Mary gently awake, whispers the warning, and together they begin to gather their few belongings in the darkness. There's urgency in every movement. Joseph bundles the child, helps Mary to her feet, and they slip out of Bethlehem under cover of night. The streets are deserted. The house is asleep, but Joseph feels eyes on them somehow, somewhere. Danger is real and close. The journey to Egypt is far longer and more perilous than the trek from Nazareth. The land is strange, the roads uncertain, but Joseph pushes forward, driven by a sense that everything depends on his ability to keep them safe. Traveling by night, hiding by day, Joseph's instincts sharpen. He listens for every unusual sound, studies the horizon for signs of trouble, and spends each waking moment planning their next move. He stretches every coin, barters for scraps of bread, and walks for miles on blistered feet. Mary bears the strain with a quiet strength, her faith shining even in exhaustion. Sometimes, Joseph catches her singing softly to the baby, a melody from her childhood, a lullaby older than any empire. Days blur into weeks. The fear never fully leaves, but Joseph is relentless. He's determined not to fail. When they finally cross into Egypt, the foreign language and unfamiliar customs remind Joseph how far they are from home, yet also how far he's come. He finds shelter among a small community of Jewish exiles. It's nothing like Nazareth. The streets are crowded, the buildings strange, the desert heat oppressive, but it is safe. And that's all that matters. In Egypt, Joseph finds work where he can. His hands, skilled in the honest labor of carpentry, are soon in demand. He builds tables and carts, repairs doors and fences, earning enough to keep Mary and Jesus fed and clothed. There's no glory here, no recognition, but Joseph finds a strange comfort in the ordinary. Each evening, he returns to the tiny home they've made, grateful simply to see his family safe and whole. Some nights, he thinks about the dream, the angel, and wonders what comes next. How long must they stay? What trials still await? But most of all, Joseph prays, not with grand words, but in the steady rhythm of his work, the quiet patience of survival, the daily choice to love without knowing the outcome. It's here, in the hidden corners of Egypt, that Joseph's faith is forged, no longer just a hope for the future, but a living trust in the God who guides even the most uncertain steps. The days in Egypt blend together, marked by the rhythms of work, rest, and the steady, patient presence of family. Joseph finds himself growing older in a land that isn't his own, surrounded by sounds and scents that are foreign, yet learning to make the unfamiliar feel like home. Every morning he wakes before dawn, slipping out into the quiet streets while Mary and the child still sleep, and joins other exiles at the city's edge. Together, they shape stone, saw wood, and share stories of the home they left behind. Joseph listens more than he speaks, his Hebrew colored with a Galilean accent that never quite fits with the Egyptian tongue, yet his reputation for fairness and skill spreads quietly through the Jewish quarter. And little by little, he's able to barter for what they need. Mary keeps their small home as welcoming as she can. She teaches Jesus old songs from Israel and tells him stories about Moses, about David. about God's faithfulness to people who wander far from home. Joseph sometimes pauses in his work to listen to their laughter. It anchors him. It reminds him that exile, for all its hardship, is not the end of the story. He watches Jesus toddle around their little courtyard, wide-eyed and fearless, and marvels that the child who was once the center of prophecy and danger now finds wonder in the simplest things: a pebble, a bird, the sunlight slanting through a fig tree. There are hard days, of course. Joseph misses Nazareth, the hills, the familiar faces, the feeling of belonging. He worries about relatives they left behind, about what's happening back in Judea. He wonders if anyone will remember him, or if his name will vanish from memory, a man who disappeared in the chaos of history. But then he sees Jesus reach for him, small hands clutching his fingers, and Joseph feels a surge of gratitude so deep it brings tears to his eyes. He may not be building palaces or shaping empires, but every day he is shaping a life, a boy who will change the world in ways Joseph can barely imagine. As months pass, Joseph and Mary learn to trust the new rhythm of their life. The news from Judea comes sporadically, passed from traveler to traveler. Each time they hear of Herod's cruelty, the pain of lost children, Joseph pulls Jesus a little closer. He never tells Mary all his fears, but she senses them anyway, and together they pray quiet, hopeful prayers for safety, for strength, for a future beyond hiding. And then, as suddenly as they left, a new message comes to Joseph. Another dream. The angel's voice is unmistakable, as clear as it was that first night in Bethlehem. Rise, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead. Relief washes over Joseph, mingled with anxiety. Returning home means facing old memories, old rumors, but it also means hope. The time of wandering is ending. The promise is alive. Packing is a bittersweet task. Joseph thanks their Egyptian neighbors, wraps up his tools, and gathers what little they own. He carries Jesus on his shoulders for part of the journey, the boy laughing and babbling at the changing scenery. Mary walks beside them, her face lifted toward the sun, her steps light with anticipation. They pass through the borderlands, their hearts beating with both excitement and uncertainty, until finally, the hills of Galilee rise before them. Nazareth comes into view, small and unassuming. But for Joseph, it's a welcome sight. He isn't sure how the village will greet them, whether time has softened old judgments, or if their return will reopen old wounds. The house they left is still standing, dusty and a little smaller than Joseph remembers, but still filled with the scent of olive wood and old hopes. He sets down his bundle, breathes in the familiar air, and, for the first time in years, feels at home. Life in Nazareth doesn't resume exactly where it left off. People watch them with curiosity, some with genuine kindness, others with wary eyes. Joseph rebuilds his workshop, dusts off his tools, and throws himself into the work he loves. His hands are stronger, his heart perhaps a little more guarded, but his spirit is determined. Customers trickle back, and soon he's busy making stools and plows, fixing doors and repairing roofs. Word spreads quietly that Joseph, the carpenter, is back, not the same man who left, but someone wiser, someone who has walked roads few in Nazareth could ever imagine. Mary and Jesus settle in too. The neighbors' children are drawn to their home by the warmth of Mary's stories and the curiosity of this boy who seems both ordinary and somehow different. Jesus grows fast, curious about everything, forever asking questions, watching Joseph at work with wide, attentive eyes. Sometimes, Joseph catches his son tracing the grain of the wood with his fingers, fascinated by its patterns. He smiles, showing Jesus how to hold a chisel, how to measure a plank, how to respect the grain so that it becomes something beautiful, not just something useful. There's a quiet pride in Joseph as he watches Jesus learn. Each lesson in carpentry becomes a lesson in patience, in the value of doing things well, even when no one is watching. Joseph doesn't preach with words, he teaches with his life. With every steady movement, every honest deal. Every day he gets up before sunrise to do the work that keeps their small family afloat. For years, life follows this gentle rhythm. There's no more drama, no more angels or dreams, just the hum of ordinary days, which, in their own way, are a kind of miracle. Joseph finds peace in the quiet, the sense that after so much wandering, he is right where God wants him to be. He doesn't seek applause. He doesn't long for the past. He simply works, loves, and trusts that, somehow, his small acts of faithfulness are part of something far greater than himself. Nazareth's seasons come and go, marked by the steady cycle of planting, harvest, and Sabbath rest. Joseph's workshop becomes a fixture in the village, its doorway open to friends, neighbors, and travelers. The sound of the mallet striking wood, the familiar scent of sawdust and oil, these become the gentle background music of everyday life. Joseph never grows rich, but there is always enough. He's respected for his integrity and his quiet skill, known as someone who keeps his word and finishes every job with care. Sometimes the elders still speak of the rumors from long ago, but most days, Joseph simply blends in content to be overlooked, content to be faithful. The years pass, and Jesus grows from a bright-eyed child into a sturdy, curious young man. Joseph watches him take on new responsibilities, helping around the shop, running errands in the market, carrying heavy bundles of wood with a determination that makes Joseph smile. There's something about the boy's questions, though, that sets him apart. While other children ask about games or chores, Jesus wants to know why the sky looks different at dusk, or how the old stories fit together, or what Joseph thinks about the world outside their tiny town. Sometimes, at sunset, they sit together on the roof, watching the golden light fade behind the hills. Jesus asks about King David, about Moses, about the God who led people out of Egypt and did a promise. Joseph doesn't always have answers, but he listens, and when he speaks, he does so carefully, knowing the boy beside him is not just his son, but the hope of generations. Mary notices the changes, too. She keeps the household humming, teaching the younger children, passing down songs and prayers from her own childhood. The family grows brothers and sisters, filling their home with laughter and the occasional squabble. But there's a special bond between Joseph and Jesus, one forged in quiet work, in shared silences, in the trust that comes from knowing life's burdens can be carried together. On Sabbath afternoons, Joseph and Mary take the children to synagogue, where Jesus listens to the readings with a focus that astonishes even the old rabbis. Sometimes, after the service, Joseph finds his son sitting in the courtyard, lost in thought, as if pondering mysteries too deep for words. Joseph's days are simple, but not always easy. Work is steady, but money is tight. There are lean harvests, times when sickness visits their home, seasons when neighbors quarrel or political unrest ripples through Galilee. Joseph faces each challenge the only way he knows how, by showing up, by doing what's right, by trusting that faithfulness in little things matters to God. He doesn't complain about what he lacks. He doesn't chase after recognition. Instead, he finds joy in shaping a sturdy table, in watching his children grow, in the comfort of Mary's steady presence at his side. One year, when Jesus is about 12, the family makes the long journey to Jerusalem for Passover. The city is crowded with pilgrims, vendors shouting, animals bleating, children darting through narrow alleys. Joseph is careful to keep the family together, mindful of the dangers in such a bustling place. Jesus is awestruck by the scale of the temple, the solemn prayers, the music echoing through marble halls. After the festival ends, the family sets out for home, joining a caravan of friends and relatives. It isn't until nightfall, a day's journey from the city, that Joseph and Mary realize Jesus isn't with the group. Panic surges in Joseph's chest. He retraces his steps, searching faces in the flickering firelight. Calling Jesus' name into the darkness, he and Mary hurry back to Jerusalem, exhaustion forgotten in their anxiety. For 3 days, they search through markets, among relatives, inside synagogues, until finally, in the temple courts, they find Jesus sitting among the teachers, listening and asking questions that amaze the scholars gathered there. Joseph's relief is so great, it almost brings him to his knees. When Mary scolds Jesus, asking why he has treated them this way, Jesus answers with words Joseph will never forget. "Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" The answer stings with mystery. Joseph is reminded once again that his role is not just to raise a son, but to steward a gift, to prepare a foundation for something beyond his understanding. The family returns to Nazareth, life resuming its familiar pattern. But Joseph can't shake the memory of those days in Jerusalem. He watches Jesus more closely now, noticing the thoughtful way he approaches his work, the kindness in his dealings with others, the sense of purpose growing behind his eyes. Joseph feels a mix of pride and humility. He's given all he can, his trade, his patience, his love, and now he trusts God to do the rest. As the years pass, Joseph's hair turns gray, his steps slow. The children become adults, scattering out into the world, but Jesus remains at home, helping in the shop, caring for Mary, sharing the quiet wisdom that has always set him apart. Joseph grows quieter, spending more time in prayer, watching the world with a gentle curiosity. Sometimes, in the hush of early morning, he feels the weight of his own story. The silence, the sacrifices, the small choices that added up to a life lived in the shadows. And yet, he knows with a peace deeper than words that he was exactly where he was meant to be. As Joseph ages, the rhythms of his life settle into something gentle, almost meditative. The shop is quieter now, the tools a little more worn, but Joseph still takes pride in the way wood gives way under his hands, how even the hardest knots can be shaped with patience. There's a quiet satisfaction in the honest work, in the way his fingers remember every curve and groove of the grain. Jesus has become his steady companion in the workshop, tall and strong now, his hands skilled with a chisel, his mind ever restless with curiosity and compassion. Joseph finds that teaching Jesus is less about instruction and more about companionship. They don't need many words between them. There's comfort in the routine, preparing lumber together, planning out a new table, sharing simple meals when the day's labor is done. Sometimes, Joseph glances at his son and sees not just a young man, but a mystery, someone who seems to carry the weight of the world in the quiet depths of his eyes. And yet, he's still the same boy who once chased grasshoppers in the yard and pestered Joseph with questions about the stars. Mary remains the heart of their home. Her laughter still fills the small house, her wisdom smoothing rough edges in the family's daily life. She and Joseph have built a world for their children, where stories are shared at the table, prayers are whispered at bedtime, and love is measured not in grand gestures, but in daily kindness. They have weathered the storms of poverty, sickness, and loss, emerging stronger, more tightly knit. There are times, as the years wear on, when Joseph slips into memory. He thinks of Bethlehem, the wild hope and terror of that night, the sharp cries of his newborn son, the warmth of Mary's exhausted smile. He recalls the journey to Egypt, the days when every shadow on the road felt like a threat, and the odd comfort he found in shaping plows for Egyptian farmers. Sometimes, he wonders what became of those shepherds, or the wise men who came bearing gifts and vanished like dreams. He wonders if they ever spoke of the night they saw God hidden in the weakness of a child. And then there are the silent questions he never voices. Why was he chosen for this? Why did God select an ordinary man, a simple craftsman, to guard such an extraordinary life? Joseph has never heard God's voice thundering from the sky, never seen miracles worked at his own hands. But he's come to believe that the miracles are often in the small things, the mended gate, the bread shared with a neighbor, the gentle look passed between loved ones. Nazareth changes. 2. As Joseph grows older, the children he once watched play in the dusty streets now bring their own sons to his shop for advice and repairs. Joseph is seen as a steady presence in the community, a man who doesn't meddle in others' affairs, but who can always be counted on in a crisis. Sometimes, people come not for carpentry, but for a word of wisdom, a listening ear. Joseph never gives long speeches, but his reputation is that of someone who can be trusted with secrets, with sorrows, and with the simple dignity of a shared silence. There are moments of worry. 2. The Romans are ever present, their soldiers marching through the roads, their laws harsh and sometimes unpredictable. Tax collectors grow more demanding, and the political rumors that drift through Galilee are rarely comforting. Joseph shields his family as best he can, teaching his sons and daughters to live simply, to care for each other, and to trust God, even when the world seems dark. His health begins to fail gradually, the way old age creeps up on everyone. There are mornings when his back aches too much for heavy lifting, days when his hands tremble just enough to make him set aside the finer work. He watches Jesus step up, taking over more of the labor, running the shop with the same patience and care Joseph once showed him. He sees in his son the quiet authority of someone who leads not with force, but with the example of faithful living. Mary senses the change. 2. She brings Joseph warm soup on cold days, sits beside him as he dozes in the sun, and together they watch their family thrive. They talk sometimes of the old days, but mostly they speak of simple things: the progress of a garden, the health of a neighbor, the laughter of grandchildren. Life has become smaller, but it is no less precious. One evening, as the village settles into dusk, Joseph sits outside his house, watching the sky shift from blue to gold. Jesus joins him, silent for a while, then asks, almost hesitantly, "Abba, did you ever think your life would turn out this way?" Joseph smiles, the lines on his face deepening. He looks at his son, so full of strength and promise, and shakes his head. "No," he says softly, "but I am grateful for every part of it." Jesus puts a hand on Joseph's shoulder, and together they watch the stars blink into existence. There's no need for more words. Joseph's life, shaped by choices both small and great, has become a legacy, written in the hearts of those he's loved. And as night falls over Nazareth, he feels a deep, abiding peace. As time passes, Joseph feels the world slow down. The bustling energy of youth fades, replaced by a gentler pace. He notices how the morning sunlight now seems softer. The evenings stretch a little longer. His bones ache more. And sometimes, memories arrive so vividly, it feels as if he's drifting between past and present. The laughter of his grandchildren, children of his other sons and daughters, echoes through the courtyard, filling the home with life and a sense of continuity. Jesus, now a man, stands tall in the family's modest house. He's known in the village as a skilled craftsman, just as Joseph once was. But there's a sense among the people that there's something unique about him. Neighbors bring broken furniture, cracked yokes, and Jesus repairs them with care. He listens to people's worries, often saying little, but somehow making everyone feel heard. Joseph takes pride in his son's gentle authority. There's a kindness in Jesus that isn't loud or showy, but strong, something Joseph recognizes from his own journey of quiet faith. Joseph finds joy in teaching his grandchildren small lessons how to plant a fig tree, the best way to mend a worn sandal, how to look for meaning in the simple patterns of the world. His stories are short, sometimes just a few words, but the little ones gather close, wide-eyed and eager, sometimes, as the children doze off during an afternoon nap. Joseph thinks back to his earliest days as a father, when every decision felt impossibly heavy, and hope was something he had to grasp in the dark. Mary is never far from his side. She knows how to read his silences, offering him a mug of warm wine or the comfort of her touch when the pain is worse. Their partnership, tested by so many hardships and separations, has become a quiet force that holds the family together. They've known lost relatives who never returned from uprisings, friends lost to illness, dreams quietly laid aside, and yet there is a contentment in their companionship, a sense that even the years that seemed lost were never wasted. Every so often, Joseph looks at Jesus and is struck by how much he both understands and doesn't understand his son. There are days when Jesus seems restless, looking to the horizon, his eyes deep with thought, as if listening to a voice only he can hear. Other times, he joins Joseph in the garden or helps repair the roof, the two of them working side by side in a comfortable silence. Joseph wonders what the future holds for his son. What kind of calling waits just beyond the next season? The synagogue remains a central part of their life. Sabbath after Sabbath, Joseph sits with his family, listening as the scrolls are unrolled and the words of Moses and the prophets fill the small room. He loves the familiar cadence of the prayers, the way the community gathers to mark both joys and sorrows. Sometimes, he sees Jesus stay behind, speaking quietly with the elders, or lost in thought as the others file out. Joseph senses something is stirring, a purpose unfolding in his son's heart, but he knows it is not his place to rush it or question it. In private moments, Joseph reflects on all that has come to pass, the dreams that changed the course of his life, the journey to Bethlehem, the flight to Egypt, the long years of quiet labor and anonymous faithfulness. He never became a figure of legend or a man of great influence. He never sat in judgment or spoke in the squares, and yet, the love and steadiness he offered became a safe harbor for a miracle the world could barely comprehend. As Joseph's body grows weaker, he accepts it without complaint. He spends more time resting in the shade, listening to the sounds of his family. Grateful for every breath, every ordinary day, he knows he's nearing the end of his journey. But there is no fear. In the hush of the evening, as Mary and Jesus sit beside him, Joseph feels the presence of peace, a peace he's come to know not from grand pronouncements, but from the steady, gentle mercy of God. One night, as stars scatter across the sky, Joseph speaks softly to Jesus. Remember what's most important. Be just, be kind, and walk humbly with your God. Jesus takes his father's hand, and in that simple gesture, Joseph's legacy is sealed, a legacy of faithfulness, humility, and love, lived not in the bright glare of history, but in the sacred shadows, where the greatest stories often begin. The days slip by quietly now, each one a gift Joseph savors. Even as his strength wanes, he finds peace in the little routines, watching the sun rise over the hills of Galilee, the familiar clatter of tools in the workshop, the way Mary moves about the house, humming old lullabies. Life is measured in small comforts and soft moments. When the weather is warm, Joseph sits beneath the fig tree in the courtyard, his grandchildren playing at his feet. Sometimes they ask him about his youth, about the strange lands he visited, or about the night Jesus was born. Joseph answers with a gentle smile, sometimes telling a story, sometimes just squeezing a small hand, letting silence speak when words are not enough. Jesus is ever attentive, always ready to lift his father's arm, help him to the table, or simply sit in quiet companionship as the dusk settles. There are no grand speeches between them, just the easy rhythm of trust that has been built over a lifetime. At times, Joseph gazes at his son and catches a glimpse of something eternal compassion so deep it seems to stretch beyond the present. Wisdom that glows in his eyes. He senses a change coming, like the last notes of a song lingering in the air before silence falls. Mary is steadfast, ever by Joseph's side. She prepares meals that are simpler now, but each one is made with care. She tucks a blanket around Joseph's shoulders in the cool of evening, her touch gentle, her eyes brimming with the tenderness only years of shared hope and struggle can create. Their bond, wordless and unshakable, is an anchor for the whole family. Sometimes Mary and Joseph sit in silence, hands entwined, hearts full of gratitude for a journey neither could have foreseen. Joseph's thoughts drift easily between past and present. He remembers the fear and awe he felt when the angel first spoke to him, the wonder of holding Jesus as a newborn, the exhaustion of long journeys through darkness and exile. He remembers the sting of shame in Nazareth, the sting of poverty and uncertainty. And yet, what rises above all these memories is the steady pulse of faithfulness, God's to him, his to God. Joseph realizes now that the greatest miracles are rarely seen by crowds. They happen in kitchens and workshops, in whispered prayers and hands held through the night. As his time draws near, Joseph's children and grandchildren gather close, drawn by the quiet gravity of goodbye. The younger ones don't understand what's happening, but they sense the shift, the hush that settles like a blanket over the household. Jesus is a calming presence, caring for his mother and siblings, his voice gentle as he guides the family through their grief. Mary stays beside Joseph, holding his hand, her tears quiet but unhidden. She whispers prayers of thanksgiving and release, her faith a soft beacon in the encroaching dark. In his final hours, Joseph finds himself looking at each face Mary's, Jesus, the children and grandchildren. He sees in them a tapestry of love, a story that will go on long after he is gone. He speaks softly, his voice weak but clear, offering blessing, encouragement, and gratitude. There's no fear, no regret. Joseph's life has been a quiet offering, a testimony to the strength found in obedience and humility. He feels the weight of God's promise, fulfilled not in fame or recognition, but in the safe shelter he helped create for the Son of God. As the last light fades from the sky, Joseph breathes deeply and lets go. Surrounded by the family he served and loved so well, the house is silent, but the silence is not empty. It is full of presence, of memories, of a love that does not end with a final breath. Mary weeps softly, comforted by Jesus' embrace, while the others mourn and remember. In that hidden home in Nazareth, Joseph's journey comes to its quiet close, and though the world barely noticed his passing, heaven holds the memory of a man who chose faithfulness in the shadows, whose silent yes still echoes in every act of courage and love that follows. After Joseph's passing, the house in Nazareth feels both emptier and somehow more sacred. For Osile, the rhythms of daily life stumble. Mary moves a bit more slowly, and the laughter of the grandchildren grows softer, as if the entire family is learning to breathe again in a world without his steady presence. The village, too, notes the absence. Neighbors stop by with bread or a few figs, offering gentle words and lingering a little longer at the door. No one makes speeches. The people of Nazareth simply know, in their way, that a good man has gone. For Mary, the ache is sharp. She finds herself reaching for Joseph in the night, expecting to find his warmth beside her. Sometimes, in the quietest hours before dawn, she remembers their shared secrets, the small joys, the decisions made together. the long road to Bethlehem, and the shared awe when God's promises took shape in their lives. She leans on Jesus more than ever. His presence is a comfort, his eyes a reflection of both the mystery and the kindness she always saw in Joseph. Jesus himself steps more fully into his role as the family's protector. The village knows him as Joseph's son, and he wears the name with pride. He keeps the shop running, repairs what is broken, and makes sure that everyone in the household is cared for. There's a quiet assurance in the way he moves, a gentleness that seems to have deepened through grief. Sometimes, when he's planning a piece of wood or fitting a joint, Jesus smiles, remembering Joseph's hands guiding his own. He hears his father's voice in his memory, patient and wise, reminding him to check his work, to take his time, to build with both strength and beauty. Mary and Jesus speak often of Joseph, not just in stories, but in the choices they make each day. Mary will smile and say, "Your father always said to do things well, even if no one is watching," or she'll quietly tidy the shop, moving Joseph's tools with the reverence of someone touching something holy. On Sabbath afternoons, they remember how Joseph loved to listen to the prayers, how he lingered in the synagogue, savoring the words of the prophets. Even in his absence, Joseph shapes their home, a gentle foundation that holds them up. As months pass, the ache of loss softens into gratitude. The family learns to laugh again, to find joy in new babies and celebrations, in the harvest and in simple meals shared around the table. Mary finds comfort in the faces of her grandchildren, in the way Jesus has grown into a man who is both gentle and strong. She sees Joseph's spirit alive in their daily acts of kindness, the way her sons share bread with a neighbor, the way her daughters sing the old songs to the little ones. Even in a world that keeps moving, Joseph's faithfulness lingers, quietly shaping every heart he touched. Jesus, meanwhile, spends more time alone. Sometimes he disappears into the hills at dawn, returning only after the sun has climbed high. He finds solace among the olive groves and rocky paths, often praying in the hush of the morning or watching the sky turn from pink to gold. Those who see him out there wonder what thoughts run through his mind, if he's remembering his father, if he's seeking answers, or if he's simply preparing for something not even he can fully name. One day, as Jesus sits beneath the old fig tree in the courtyard, a neighbor stops by, clutching a broken stool. The man is a little embarrassed. He's tried to fix it himself, but the repair didn't hold. Jesus welcomes him, inspects the stool with care, and sets about mending it, his hands moving with quiet confidence. As he works, the man watches, remembering how Joseph would take the time to explain things, to offer a word of encouragement, to make even a simple repair feel meaningful. When Jesus hands the stool back, sturdier than before, the man's gratitude is clear. "Your father taught you well," he says, and Jesus nods, feeling both the ache of loss and the pride of inheritance. Over time, stories of Joseph become woven into the fabric of Nazareth. People speak of his honesty, his humor, the way he would pause in his work to help a child or share a loaf of bread. They tell tales of the night Joseph and Mary arrived in Bethlehem, of the dangers they faced in Egypt, of the courage it took to return home. No one calls Joseph a hero, but in quiet ways, everyone knows that something of his spirit lives on, not just in his family, but in the whole community. For Jesus, these memories become a kind of foundation. He carries Joseph's teachings into every new challenge: the importance of patience, the dignity of honest work, the value of showing up for others, even when it means going unnoticed. These lessons will echo through the years to come, guiding his choices as he steps toward the destiny that awaits him, and shaping the message he will one day share with the world: that greatness is not found in power or pride, but in humility, in kindness, and in love. Seasons turn, and Nazareth carries on. Even as Joseph's absence settles into the marrow of the family's life, the memory of his quiet strength is like a low, steady note, sometimes barely heard, but always felt. For Mary, there are moments when she still turns, expecting to see him in the doorway, his hands dusted with flour or sawdust, his eyes creased with a gentle smile. She busies herself with the work of the home, pouring her love and energy into the children and grandchildren, weaving Joseph's wisdom into the fabric of their days. Jesus, now fully grown, becomes a pillar not just for his family, but for the wider village. He is the carpenter's son to everyone in Nazareth, a reminder that people remember Joseph not by monuments, but by the living presence of the one he raised. Jesus repairs their homes, builds new tables, listens to old men's stories, and comforts widows in their loneliness. He does it with a patience and warmth that is striking, and people often find themselves opening up to him in ways they never expected. But for all the normalcy, there is a growing sense that Jesus is restless, drawn by something beyond even the responsibilities of the family workshop. Mary notices him lingering longer in the synagogue, his gaze fixed not on the rabbi, but somewhere beyond, as if listening for a distant melody. Sometimes, in the cool twilight, he wanders out of town. Climbing up to the rocky heights that overlook Galilee, he returns with dust on his sandals, the look of someone who has seen both sorrow and hope. When Mary asks where he's been, he answers with a smile that hints at more than he can say. The villagers begin to talk, not in judgment, but with a kind of curious respect. They remember how Joseph had always seemed content with simple faith, with trusting God in small things, and they see some of that same quiet conviction in Jesus. Yet, there's a difference too, a sense that he carries a burden, a mission that is both heavy and radiant. Rumors drift in from neighboring towns about a new prophet in the wilderness, a wild-eyed man calling people to repentance. Some evenings, Jesus seems thoughtful when these rumors reach him, as if weighing the words in his heart. Meanwhile, Mary finds comfort in watching her family gather. The home Joseph built has become a sanctuary for children, siblings, cousins, and friends. The meals are simple, but there is laughter and warmth, echoes of Joseph in every act of generosity. Mary tells stories, her voice soft and sure, about the years of wandering, about the night in Bethlehem, about the angels and dreams and the faith it took to say yes when she could have said no. She sees her children listening, sees in their faces a reflection of the love that sustained her through so much loss and change. As the days grow longer, Jesus begins to take longer trips away from Nazareth. He helps an uncle with a project in another town, visits the market in Sepphoris, spends the night with friends who live by the lake shore. Each time he leaves, Mary feels a familiar mix of pride and anxiety. She knows, deep down, that her son is preparing for something she cannot stop. Nor would she want to. In quiet moments, she thinks of Joseph, wishes she could ask his advice, but finds her own strength growing as she remembers how he faced uncertainty with trust. One morning, Jesus lingers at the edge of the courtyard, watching his mother tend to the garden. Mary looks up and sees him standing there, caught between the world of their family and the world beyond. She dries her hands, walks over, and stands beside him. They say nothing for a while, just looking at the hills rising in the distance. Then Jesus turns and embraces her, the gesture gentle but full of meaning. Mary holds him close, her heart full of both joy and ache. She knows he will go, knows that Joseph would have told him to follow where God leads, and she whispers a blessing over him. As Jesus sets out down the road, Mary watches until he is only a figure in the golden morning light. She stands in the doorway, her hands clasped together, and prays the old prayers, the ones Joseph taught her, the ones she learned as a girl, the ones that have carried her through every trial. The house is quieter, but it is not empty. It is filled with memory, with hope, with the assurance that the story Joseph helped shape is far from finished. For Nazareth, life continues. There are weddings and funerals, harvests and lean years, new faces in the market and old ones passing on. But in the heart of one family, the lessons of a righteous man echo, reminding all who remember him that the greatest callings are sometimes answered in silence, and that the love of an ordinary father can shape a destiny far beyond what anyone might see. It's an unremarkable morning when the rumors reach Nazareth that John, the son of Zechariah, is preaching by the river in the wilderness, calling people to repentance and new beginnings. The news stirs something deep in Jesus. He puts away his tools one day, dusts off his hands, and quietly tells Mary that he needs to go just for a while. He assures her, but they both sense this journey is more than a simple visit. Mary doesn't protest. Instead, she looks him in the eye, searching for traces of the little boy she once cradled, and all she sees is the strong, compassionate man Joseph helped shape. She nods, smoothing the hair from his forehead, and whispers a blessing as he leaves. Jesus walks out of Nazareth, following the dusty roads that once carried Joseph and Mary to and from far places. Every step is both familiar and full of new purpose. The land feels alive under his feet, the breeze carrying the scents of olive and grain. He thinks of his father, how Joseph faced hardship, exile, and uncertainty without complaint. How his faith was never loud, but always steady. A presence that shaped Jesus' own understanding of God's love. Down by the Jordan, the crowds are already gathering. John is fierce, his voice echoing off the water, his message urgent. Jesus watches from the edge, waiting. When at last he steps into the river, John hesitates, recognizing something holy in his cousin. But Jesus insists, and as the water closes over his head, the sky seems to open, the Spirit descending like a dove. A voice, ancient and eternal, speaks blessing and delight. The moment is both intimate and public and unveiling, the beginning of something the world has waited centuries to see. When Jesus returns to the hills, the world feels changed. He spends long days in solitude, praying, wrestling with temptation and doubt, much as Joseph once did in the dark nights of Egypt or in the silent questions of Nazareth. These trials, faced alone, become a furnace for his calling. The lessons of patience, humility, and trust learned at Joseph's side become the roots from which his strength grows. Back in Nazareth, Mary senses the shift. She carries on with her daily work, surrounded by the growing swirl of grandchildren and the daily concerns of a village that rarely changes. But she prays for her son every morning and night, feeling in her bones the echoes of old promises. Sometimes neighbors whisper about Jesus, their voices tinged with confusion or skepticism. "Isn't this the carpenter's son?" they ask, not in mockery, but in genuine wonder at the things they've begun to hear. Mary just smiles, knowing the answer is both yes and infinitely more. When Jesus finally returns to Nazareth, he's different, still her son, still the gentle craftsman, but also someone who seems to carry the weight of ancient prophecy in his gaze. The family gathers for a meal, and for a moment, it feels like old times. Laughter, stories, the warmth of familiar voices. But Jesus is quieter, listening more than speaking, as if already standing with one foot in another world. Word spreads that Jesus is teaching in the synagogues, that he speaks with an authority that surprises everyone. People begin to follow him, drawn by the hope and the challenge in his words. He heals. He welcomes outcasts. He calls fishermen and tax collectors to walk beside him. Through it all, the teachings Joseph gave him about justice, about mercy, about the sacredness of everyday work shine through in everything he does. Mary, watching from a distance, feels pride and trepidation mingling in her heart. The stories the neighbors share grow wilder miracles, bold challenges to the old ways, words that cut straight to the heart. Some in Nazareth are scandalized, others are in awe. For Mary, every new chapter in Jesus' life is a reminder that Joseph's legacy endures, not only in their home, but now radiating out into the world. And in quieter moments, when Jesus finds himself alone, whether praying on a hillside or walking through a field of wheat, he feels Joseph's presence like a memory made solid. He remembers the sound of wood being planed smooth, the warmth of a hand on his shoulder, the steady certainty of a man who chose to obey without needing to understand. Joseph's faith becomes the ground beneath his feet, the compass guiding him as he steps into the uncertain future. As Jesus' ministry spreads, the world will know his name, his message, his miracles. But in the heart of every lesson, in every act of compassion, there lingers the imprint of a father's quiet devotion, a love that was content to go unrecognized, a faithfulness that found its reward in the flourishing of another. Jesus' reputation grows quickly. The narrow streets of Nazareth, once so familiar and confining, begin to seem small compared to the crowds pressing in from every direction. Capernaum, Magdala, the villages along the Sea of Galilee. He teaches on hillsides, standing where fishermen can hear his voice across the water. The stories people tell about him healing the sick, welcoming sinners, restoring hope begin to ripple out in every direction, carried on the tongues of those hungry for meaning. Yet even as the excitement builds, the memory of Joseph remains with Jesus in every step he takes. When he bends over a sick child, his touch gentle and careful, there's a trace of Joseph's steady hands. When he pauses to listen to someone's worries, his silence is the same sacred space his father always created a way of telling someone, "You matter. I see you." In every parable about seeds, about the foundation of a house, about the dignity of labor, you can hear echoes of the workshop in Nazareth. Jesus draws from the rhythms and metaphors of his upbringing, the sweep of a broom, the balance of a yoke, the value of small, faithful acts. Mary, back at home, keeps up with the news in bits and pieces, reports from travelers, letters from relatives, an occasional visit from one of the disciples. Sometimes she worries. She knows how the world reacts to change. She remembers the strange mixture of fear and awe that followed Joseph and her through their earliest days. And she wonders how her son bears the weight of so many expectations. But she remembers Joseph's calm in the face of uncertainty, the way he trusted God's plan, even when he could not see the road ahead. It comforts her now, a steadying presence, as she prays for Jesus to be protected and guided. Sometimes, Jesus returns to Nazareth. Though the visits are never simple, the people who watched him grow up now struggle to understand how the boy who once swept the synagogue floor could become a prophet. They murmur among themselves, "Isn't this the carpenter's son? Aren't his brothers and sisters still here with us?" The skepticism in their eyes stings. But Jesus understands. Joseph had taught him that people see what they expect, and it takes time and humility for hearts to open to the new. He bears the skepticism with patience, sometimes with a gentle word, sometimes by quietly moving on to the next town. On those visits, Mary and Jesus sit together under the same fig tree where Joseph once rested. The conversation drifts from daily tasks to memories. Mary recalls how Joseph could fix anything, how he'd whistle as he worked, how his kindness was never forced or calculated. Jesus listens, smiling at the memories, sometimes laughing at a story from his childhood, sometimes falling silent as the gravity of the past settles around them. He misses his father, but he feels him close, especially now. When the road ahead grows steeper, Jesus' disciples notice his craftsmanship, not just in the way he builds things, but in the way he shapes lives. He meets people where they are, never in a rush to condemn, always seeking to restore. He sees the value in what is small and humble, just as Joseph did. If you're faithful in little, he tells them, you'll be faithful in much. He reminds them that the kingdom of God is like yeast, working quietly through the dough, or like a tiny seed that becomes a tree. These are lessons born in a workshop, lessons that endure because they are true in both wood and spirit. The farther Jesus travels, the more the stories of his deeds spread. Sometimes they're exaggerated, sometimes misunderstood, but at the heart of every account is a truth Joseph lived out daily. Love quietly, serve faithfully, trust that God sees what is hidden. When the crowds press in and the religious leaders question his authority, Jesus stands firm, not with arrogance, but with the humility and resolve he saw in Joseph's eyes. He knows who he is, and he knows whose love shaped him long before the world learned his name. At night, after the crowds have faded and the fire burns low, Jesus remembers his Father's words and example. He thanks God for the foundation Joseph laid, for the ordinary days that became extraordinary in hindsight, for a faith that never needed a stage. And in those moments, the Son feels the Father's blessing still resting on him, a blessing stronger and more enduring than any applause or earthly acclaim. With every passing season, Jesus travels farther from Nazareth, moving from town to town, his life unfolding like the parables he tells, simple on the surface, yet filled with layers of meaning. People flock to him, desperate for healing, hungry for hope, drawn by the warmth in his eyes and the promise in his voice, sometimes in the hush before dawn or the stillness after a long day. Jesus remembers what it felt like to walk those early roads with Joseph each journey, no matter how uncertain, guided by trust and quiet courage. There are days when opposition rises. Pharisees and scribes question his words, testing him with riddles and rules, trying to pin him down or trip him up. Jesus faces them with a calm that confounds his critics, a patience he learned, watching Joseph face gossip, judgment, and the burdens of exile. He does not lash out, but answers with the wisdom born of long nights spent listening and working in silence. There's a strength in restraint, a power in refusing to answer anger with anger. And this strength is Joseph's legacy living on in the Son. Crowds press in from everywhere. Some come for miracles, others for the chance to see the prophet everyone is talking about. But in the eyes of the children, the poor, the sick, Jesus sees the people Joseph would have loved the unnoticed. The humble, the ones who rarely find themselves at the center of any story. He kneels to speak to them, lifts them up, and blesses them with the dignity Joseph modeled all his life. In these quiet, everyday acts, Jesus honors the Father who taught him that greatness is found in how you treat those with nothing to offer in return. Mary, too, continues to play her part. She hears the stories from afar, sometimes with pride, sometimes with fear. She knows how quickly crowds can turn, how praise can become suspicion, how love can be tested by adversity. In her prayers, she asks for strength not just for Jesus, but for herself, to keep trusting as Joseph always did. She holds fast to the memory of the man who weathered scandal, exile, and poverty with steady hands and an unbreakable heart. There are moments, rare but precious, when Jesus is able to slip away from the crowds. He climbs a hill at dusk, sits beneath a tree, and lets the silence wrap around him. In those moments, he talks to God in the same way Joseph once did, simply, honestly, without pretense. Sometimes he grieves the losses, the father who left before his public life began, the quiet years of family and work that now feel impossibly far away. Other times, he gives thanks for the gift of an ordinary upbringing, for the steadying force of a father's love, for the lessons that became the bedrock of his soul. The disciples, watching Jesus, marvel at the authority and humility that live side by side in him. They ask where his wisdom comes from. And though Jesus rarely speaks of Joseph directly, his teachings are laced with his Father's influence. When he tells them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last, and the servant of all," they hear not just a preacher's challenge, but a carpenter's ethic. A worldview shaped by hands that worked without acclaim, and a heart content to give more than it received. Nazareth, meanwhile, fades into legend for many who follow Jesus, but for him, it is always present, a touchstone of memory and meaning. When others scoff at his humble beginnings, asking, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" Jesus smiles. He knows that the world is changed not by the powerful, but by the faithful. Not by those who shout the loudest, but by those who love most deeply and serve most quietly. Joseph's life was the seed, planted in the dark, that grew into a tree strong enough to shelter the hopes of the world. At times, when Jesus tells stories of vineyards, fig trees, and lost coins, the disciples sense something deeply personal behind the words. These are not just lessons for the masses, but echoes of childhood memories. Joseph showing him how to prune a vine, how to sweep a floor, how to care for things that others overlook. In every story, the thread of Joseph's influence runs quietly, binding past and present in a tapestry of love, faith, and hope. The journey becomes heavier as Jesus' path leads toward Jerusalem. The crowds are bigger now, the expectations greater, and the dangers more real. The disciples sense it too. The way the air seems to shift when Jesus speaks of the future, the urgency in his voice when he warns them of trouble to come. Through it all, Jesus remains anchored not by fame or power, but by the simple faithfulness he learned at Joseph's side. As the road grows steeper, Jesus draws his friends closer, teaching them what it means to serve, to forgive, to carry burdens not just for themselves, but for others. He washes their feet, not with the pride of a master, but with the humility of a craftsman who knows the value of every footstep, every act of care. When he speaks of the greatest love being the willingness to lay down one's life for friends, the disciples see the truth of it shining in his eyes, and behind that, the steady, wordless devotion of Joseph, the father who lived his whole life in service to others. In the quiet moments before the storm, Jesus returns again and again to prayer. He finds gardens and olive groves, places where the earth feels close, where the memory of working the soil and shaping wood is fresh in his hands. He kneels, not as a king demanding favor, but as a son remembering long evenings in the Nazareth workshop, the smell of sawdust and oil, the sound of his father's voice guiding, encouraging, never forcing. Even now, with the weight of the world pressing on him, Jesus draws strength from the peace. Joseph modeled the assurance that doing what is right, even in the shadows, matters more than being understood or admired. As Passover approaches, the city is filled with pilgrims. The streets are alive with anticipation and tension. Jesus gathers with his disciples for a final meal, a simple table, bread and wine. The hands that break the bread are strong but gentle, shaped by decades of labor, of holding, healing, and building. In this act, there's an echo of every meal Joseph ever served, every lesson about gratitude, every night, when a humble home was enough to hold a world of hope. Mary is in Jerusalem too, watching from a distance, feeling the old ache return. She remembers those first uncertain days, when Joseph believed her and sheltered her, when together they trusted God for a future they could barely imagine. She sees now how her son has grown into that same quiet strength. When she looks at Jesus, she sees Joseph, the kindness, the resolve, the humility, and it comforts her, even as the shadows lengthen. The week unfolds in a blur of confrontation and teaching. Of private conversations and public debate, Jesus enters the temple, turning over tables not in rage, but in the passion of one who loves justice, who knows that true worship is found not in show but in sincerity. The people are divided. Some cheer, some plot, some simply wonder. And through it all, Jesus never loses sight of his purpose, Joseph's legacy. The lesson that the foundation no one sees is the most important of all, sustains him, even as friends fall away and enemies close in on the night he is betrayed. Jesus withdraws to pray in a garden, his soul overwhelmed. The disciples doze nearby, unable to bear the weight of his sorrow. In his solitude, Jesus remembers Joseph, how his father faced fear and danger for his family, how he protected Mary and Jesus without thought for himself, how he remained steadfast even when no one else understood. That memory is a comfort, a source of courage. Father, Jesus whispers, "Not my will, but yours be done." It is the prayer of every righteous one who has ever chosen faith over fear, service over glory, love over all. As soldiers come with torches and swords, Jesus stands and meets them not as a victim, but as a son secure in his Father's love, a love first given by Joseph in Nazareth. Now offered back to the world, the darkness that descends over Jerusalem in those final days is palpable. Crowds that once shouted praises now swirl with confusion, anger, and fear. Jesus is dragged from one tribunal to another, questioned, mocked, beaten. Through it all, he bears himself with the quiet dignity he learned not only from heaven, but from years at Joseph's side. Every insult hurled at him, every misunderstanding, every blow he endures them not just as a prophet or king, but as the son of a carpenter who taught him the strength of enduring what must be borne in silence. Mary is there, her heart breaking as she witnesses the suffering of her firstborn. She remembers the journeys with Joseph, those anxious nights in Egypt, the whispered prayers as they watched over Jesus while he slept. She wishes, as she stands among the crowd, that Joseph were beside her now, a strong arm around her shoulders, a wordless comfort. Yet in a strange way, she feels his presence in the resolve she sees in Jesus. The world is coming apart, but her son stands unbroken, as Joseph always did, no matter the storms. The disciples scatter, fear gnawing at their courage. Only a handful remain at the foot of the cross: Mary, a few women, and John. As Jesus is nailed to the wood, he looks down and sees his mother. Their eyes meet, sharing the ache of love and separation, and in that moment, something unspoken passes between them, a memory of all the quiet strength that carried them here. Jesus entrusts Mary to John's care, echoing Joseph's lifelong commitment to keep her safe, even in agony. He fulfills the responsibility of a son, honoring the example set for him in Nazareth. As Jesus suffers on the cross, the echoes of Joseph's lessons are woven through each moment: the patience to endure when there is no escape, the humility to forgive when wronged, the steadfastness to finish what was begun, even if it means dying uncelebrated. Misunderstood, the world sees only pain, only loss. But in Jesus' final acts, there is the beauty of a life given wholly for others. A gift first practiced in the self-giving love of a father who said yes to the impossible. The sun hides its face as Jesus breathes his last. There are no crowds left to cheer, no miracles to dazzle the city. There is just the sound of weeping, the stillness of defeat. Mary's sobs mingle with the hush that settles over the hill. Yet beneath the sorrow, there is also a peace, a sense that, somehow, every lesson Joseph ever taught about trusting in the unseen, about being faithful in the face of doubt, is now fulfilled in the surrender of the son he raised. Later, when Jesus is taken down and laid in the tomb, it is in the hands of those who loved him most. Not the powerful or the important, but the faithful, As the stone rolls shut, it feels like the end, but Joseph's legacy, like the story itself, is not finished. It lives on, hidden for a moment, waiting for dawn. In the days that follow, Mary and the others grieve. They gather in small rooms, whispering prayers, holding each other. Remembering, Mary finds comfort in recalling Joseph's wisdom, his unwavering belief that even in the darkest nights, God's promises endure. She tells stories to the younger children of how their grandfather protected them, how he loved in a way that needed no applause. It is this kind of faith, the quiet, enduring, sacrificial love, that will become the foundation of everything Jesus' followers build in the days ahead. On the third day, rumors of hope begin to spread. The tomb is empty, the stone rolled away. Jesus lives, and his presence among his friends is transformed radiant, unbound, eternal, in every greeting of peace, in every word of forgiveness, in every invitation to new life. The world hears both the voice of the risen Lord and the faint but steady heartbeat of a father's love. A love that shaped the Savior in silence, then trusted him to change the world. Resurrection morning dawns, not with trumpet blasts or fanfare, but with the quiet light slipping over the hills just as Joseph would rise before anyone else, preparing the shop or tending the fire so the house would feel warm and safe. In the newness of that day, as disciples run breathless from the empty tomb, as Mary Magdalene weeps with astonished joy, something of Joseph's spirit is present in every moment of awe and relief. His faith, forged in obscurity, is now the soil where the world's greatest hope bursts into bloom. The days that follow are filled with confusion and wonder, fear and revelation. Jesus appears again and again, not to kings or priests, but to friends, to ordinary people who loved him. Each encounter is intimate, filled with the same patience, humor, and compassion that once filled the workshop in Nazareth. The risen Jesus cooks breakfast on the shore for tired fishermen, walks dusty roads with those who have lost hope, offers peace in the trembling upper room. He does not come back to judge, but to heal, to restore, to remind his followers that God's greatest miracles are often hidden in the small, faithful acts of ordinary lives. The disciples, still learning, begin to understand what greatness really is. It's not in the roar of the crowd, but in breaking bread for a hungry neighbor. It's not in building empires, but in mending what is broken, as Joseph did so often with nothing more than his hands and a little faith. Jesus, in every gesture, honors the way his Father taught him to see the sacred in the simple. In a cup of water, in a gentle word, in the courage to say yes to a task no one else would want. Mary, growing older now, keeps Joseph's memory alive. She tells her grandchildren stories of a man who never sought recognition, who trusted dreams and followed angels, who worked until his hands were scarred and his heart was wise. She tells them that their grandfather was not a king or a prophet, but he was, in the deepest sense, chosen, and she watches as the next generation picks up hammers and loaves, laughter and love, and carries his legacy forward. In the years to come, the message that will circle the globe begins not in palaces or on scrolls, but in homes like Joseph's, places where faithfulness is measured not by applause, but by love. The followers of Jesus build communities that welcome outcasts and orphans, mend the wounds of strangers, and trust that every unnoticed act of kindness matters. They remember the story of the carpenter's son, and in doing so, they remember the carpenter himself. Centuries pass, and the world changes in ways Joseph could never have imagined. Cathedrals rise, hymns are sung, the name of Jesus is spoken in 1,000 languages, yet the heart of it all remains a family. A father's quiet devotion, a mother's brave yes, a son's faithful obedience. Joseph's life, written in the margins of the gospel, becomes the bedrock of redemption's story. His silence, once overlooked, is revealed as the language of trust, the music of a heart attuned to God's purpose. So when the world asks, "Isn't this the carpenter's son?" let the answer be a joyful yes, because in that simple truth is hidden all the hope that ever was, that God comes close, not to the great or the powerful, but to the humble, to the willing, to those who say yes with open hands and open hearts. And if you listen between the pages, in the laughter of children, in the hush of dawn and the crackle of an evening fire, you can still hear Joseph's legacy, a blessing for every ordinary soul who chooses to love, to build, to trust, and to believe that even in silence, a life can change the world.